We sit in a comfortable position and close the eyes. Allow your attention to go to the silence deep within the mind. Connect with that silence. Become the silence. You are the silent witness. Now listen with the senses of the silent witness. To the Yoga Vasishtha. Book 3, Chapter 115, continuing with verse 25. Now hear me tell you the useful moral of the story of Lavana and how he was transformed to a tribal Chandala or outcast by derangement of his mind. The mind has to feel the effects of the actions, whether good or evil. In order that you may understand it well, listen attentively to what I will now tell you. What Vasishtha is telling us here is that this story of Lavana is a story of the experiences of his individual karmic traces that have caused him to go into a state of derangement in his mind, where he relives a past experience that has left a deep track of individual karmic traces. When we listen to this reading, what it's going to do is it is going to address certain individual karmic traces that we have that are very deep in the Manomaya kosha. And it is going to enliven those karmic traces so that they can be balanced. Verse 27, Lavana was born of the line of King Harishchandra. One day, as he was sitting apart from all others of his court, he was thinking to himself, my grandfather was a great king and performed the Rasasuya sacrifice. I, being born of his line, must perform the same in my mind. Now, what we see here is something that arises frequently in life. It is the stimulation of a deep karmic trace, creating a thought or desire or an impulse to do something. And there comes with it probably some logic about why it would be a great idea to do this today. This is, of course, all illusion, all being inspired by individual karmic traces. We were going to see an example of someone who listened to his individual karmic traces, to his ego, and is led down a path of reliving or resonating with this deep groove of individual karmic traces in the mind. Having determined so, and getting the things ready for the sacrifice, he entered the sacrificial hall for his initiation in the sacred rites. He called the sacrificial priests and honored the holy saint. He invited the gods to it and lighted the sacrificial fire. Having performed the sacrifice to his heart's content, and having honored the gods, sages, and Brahmins, he went to the forest to live there for a year. Now we're reminded this is all in his mind. Then, having made presents of all his wealth to the Brahmins and other men, he awoke from his slumber in the same forest by the evening of that day. Thus, King Lavana attained the merit of the sacrifice in his internal satisfaction of having attained the merit of the sacrifice. So he performed a yajna similar to one performed in his past lives, and then relived the satisfaction that he had from that previous performance. Hence, learn to know that the mind is the recipient of pleasure and pain. Therefore, employ your attention, Ram, to the purification of your mind. Every man becomes perfect in his mind, in his full time and proper place. But he is utterly lost who believes himself to be composed only of his body. the mind being roused in transcendental reason. All miseries are removed from rational understanding. Just like the beams of the rising sun falling upon the lotus bud dispel the darkness that had closely contracted its folded petals. Chapter 116. Moral of King Lavana's experience. Summary of creation and liberation. Ram asked, Sage, what is the evidence that Lavana obtained the reward of his mental Rajasuya sacrifice through his transformation into the state of a tribal, as it was wrought upon him by the enchantment of the magician? Vashishta answered, I was present myself at King Lavana's court, where the magician made his appearance, and I saw everything that took place with my own eyes. After the magician finished his work and left, King Lavana respectfully asked me with the other courtiers to explain to him what had happened. After I pondered the matter and had clearly seen its cause, I explained the meaning of the magician's spell. This is the way I will now explain it to you, my Ram. I remembered that all those who performed the Rajasuya sacrifice were subjected to various painful difficulties and dangers, which they had to suffer for a full dozen of years. It was then that Indra, the Lord of Heaven, had compassion for Lavana and sent his heavenly messenger in the form of the magician to avert his calamity. He taxed the king who would make the Rajasuya sacrifice with the infliction of the very many hardships in his dream. Then departed on his aerial journey in the abode of the gods and spiritual masters. Thus, Rama, it is quite evident that there is no doubt in it. The mind is the active and passive agent of all kinds of actions and their sequence. Therefore, Rub out the dirt of your heart and polish the gem of your mind. Using the fire of your reason to melt the mind down like a particle of ice. Attain your chief supreme goodwill, good at last. Now, Vasishtha is saying we use the fire of reason to melt the mind down like a particle of ice. It's a very good description of what we do during our meditation. During the meditation, we're performing dharana. Dharana is the thinking of a mantra. The thinking of a mantra is creating a thought in the mind purposefully. A particular thought that has the ability to balance any karmic traces that it comes into contact with. Now, this process of the mind coming into contact with karmic traces through the agency of the mantra is a process of discrimination. What is happening is we think the mantra, and then at some point thoughts arise in the mind, and we use the mind's discrimination faculty to decide that's a thought, that is not the mantra. The mantra is this. My task is think this mantra, and then we come back to the mantra. So we're using our reason in that case to keep the mind moving in the direction of progress by thinking mantra. Same thing happens during samyama. We think a sutra, come back to the self, and what happens? Perhaps thoughts arise. We ignore those thoughts. And when we ignore the thoughts, we are using our intellect to determine this is thought, but I am the silent witness. So I choose not to pay attention to the thought. I stay in samadhi. Again, we're using our intellect. So it is through the use of the intellect, discrimination between what is and what is the various fractures that have arisen, the separations that have arisen in the mind, and focusing the mind in a direction that will take us to our objective of balancing the karmic traces. Know the mind is identical to ignorance. Now, why does he make that statement? The mind is identical to ignorance. Ignorance is separation. Ignorance is duality. Ignorance is calcified in the form of individual karmic traces. The mind is an expression of these individual karmic traces. Which by its magical power presents these multitudes and endless varieties of beings and things before you. There is no difference in the meanings of the words ignorance, mind, understanding, and individual soul. Now that's an interesting statement as well, isn't it? Because why is there no difference? It seems like we're talking about all sorts of things. Ignorance, mind, understanding, and individual soul. None of these are real. They are all illusion. He goes on to explain. As the word tree and all its synonyms. Knowing the truth, keep a steady mind, free from all its desires. As the orb of the clear sun of your intellect has its rise, so the darkness of your willing and unwilling flies away from you. Know also this truth, that there is nothing in the world that you cannot see, or which you cannot make your own, or which can be taken away from you. There is nothing that does not die, or what is not yours, or someone else's. All things become all at all times. The multitudes of existent bodies and their known properties meet together in the substantiality of Brahman. Just like the various kinds of unfired clay vessels are melted down in the same watery substance. Brahma said, Sage, you said that by weakening the desires of our mind, we can put an end to our pleasures and pains. But tell me now, how is it possible to stop the course of our naturally fickle minds? So Rama is asking, obviously, how do we put an end to the mind? How do we stop it from all this thinking, playing with the illusion, instead of simply being silent? Vasishtha replied, Hear, O bright moon of Raghu's race. I will tell you the proper course for quieting the restless mind. By knowing this, you shall obtain peace of mind and be freed from the actions of your organs of sense. I have told you that before about the triple nature of the production of beings here below, which I believe you well remember. Of these, the first is that power of Brahma, who assumed to himself the shape of the divine will and saw in his presence, in whatever he wished to produce, through which he brought the physical system into existence. Now we continue with closed eyes, centered in the silent witness, established in the silent witness. Start the mantra in the mind. Let it go. Follow the mantra as it goes deep into consciousness to balance the karmic traces that have been enlivened by this reading. Jai Gurudev.